Hello and welcome once again to episode 28 of Code Completion. My name is Dimitri and I'm continuing our Host Spotlight series to talk with Spencer about how he got started in development, what he's currently working on lately, and everything in between. So since it's just us today, Indie App Spotlight, Complete the Code, and Compiler Error will be back next week. So before we get started with this week's episode of Code Completion, this episode is brought to you by Super Easy Timer. Super Easy Timer is a quick and easy to use timer app for your Mac. It's completely text-based, so you can type in English what you want, 20 minutes or 5 p.m., hit enter, and instantly start a timer. The timer understands English text to create, update, or start a new timer. You can quickly change an active countdown, even while it's counting down. There are simple keyboard shortcuts to reset or pause. No menus, no sliders, just use English to control your timer. And this app works great if you're doing like a Zoom presentation and things like that, or if you're teaching a class and you need to take a quick break. Excellent app for that use case. So we want to thank Super Easy Timer for sponsoring our show. Search for Super Easy Timer on the Mac App Store today to give it a try. So Spencer, how did you get into development?
Oh man. I got into development by dropping out of college.
An excellent first start.
Yeah, I know, right? I was going to college originally to get basically let me back up here. Ever since about high school, like my junior year in high school, I started getting into like a lot of digital media. So going into, video production classes, those were kind of my favorite classes, photography classes. And so like all of my electives in high school went to, some sort of digital media creation. And that was kind of my plan through high school. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to college for my Bachelor of Fine Arts in, some digital media or another, whether it was, cinematography, photography, whatever. And I went to college for a semester, and it was good. Although I kind of realized that I wasn't as good as I thought I was, if that makes sense. I remember very distinctly it was my drawing one class, and I kind of specifically wanted to go into digital media because I have a shaky hand. I'm not very good at, just like normal, artsy art. And I just got absolutely ravaged the first time we had I want to call it like a code review, but it's not. It's, like a review of everyone's drawing for whatever that unit of work was, right? We'd stick all the posters up and walk around and talk about what was good and bad with, each person's drawing. And I got destroyed, and that was okay. I took it kind of hard at first, but that ultimately helped me realize like, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I enjoy this stuff, but I don't necessarily know if I could make a career out of this. So I ended up finishing the semester, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take a break. I need to figure out what I need to do. And my plan was just to take a break and most likely come back to college doing something else, changing kind of what my focus was. As I was only one semester, so I hadn't really started a major per se. And then right around that time, it was about Christmas time. My cousin, who lives really close to me, and my family, was like, "Hey, there's this thing called a boot camp. Let's go to it. It's for programming." And I was like, all right, like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have always been interested in computers. My dad bought me a computer when I was like 3 years old just to like get me going on it. And I probably attribute, loving computers so much to it just being a part of my life, my entire life, where, back in the 90s, that wasn't the case for everyone. Not everyone had like a personal computer. It was like a one family computer, but I had one in my bedroom and it didn't really do anything, but I would get on and use it. And that was always just fun to me, but it never really clicked to me like, oh, hey, I should start programming. And until, my cousin was like, hey, let's go to this boot camp. And I was like, okay, sure, whatever, and he wanted to do iOS development. And I was like, great. I love iPhones. I love, we had Macs in our family for a fair amount of time at that point. We had kind of switched over, and I was like, great, let's do it. I didn't really expect much out of it. I expected it to be like, it's a 12-week course. That's great. I'll go for that. And then maybe I'll, pick up with college after that. So I went to the course. It was Dev Mountain, a boot camp here in Utah. So I moved up to Salt Lake for a few months. The funny part about that was it was my cousin, and he had talked to me and my other cousin about going. And then he bailed basically, and he left me and my other cousin to go
Fend for yourselves.
Yeah, no, for real. He was like, yeah, let's totally do, he was psyching us all up, and then he bailed on us. So I thought that was kind of funny. But I went through the course, me and my other cousin, and we finished, and then I thought it was a great experience. I think that's maybe why later on I ended up getting into teaching, was because I had ultimately a good enough experience to where, I did go from zero programming knowledge to, a basic understanding of iOS development. Of course, you don't learn a ton in 12 weeks, but I learned enough to put an app on the App Store, and I thought that was super cool, and it was motivating to me, I guess. And so I can't remember if it was a few weeks or a month or so later, I got a message in our Slack group that was like, hey, do you want to come in potentially, do you want to come in for an interview to teach, basically help out as sort of like a mentor at Dev Mountain? And so I went in, and that was really kind of my first like adult interview, which was super scary because it was, the kind of the, I guess, director of the program and one of the teachers of my program, Andrew Madsen, and I basically had to prove that I had learned things in the last 3 months of
the final
them teaching me. Yeah, for real. It was, it was nerve wracking, and somehow I got the job. To be honest, I'm still not sure to this day. I feel like I bombed the interview. But I got the job, and so I started working there as a mentor, which meant really I would be teaching these 2.5, 3 hour lessons on some concept that I, ultimately learned not too long ago. And it was a really interesting experience because I was essentially forced to know this stuff, right? You can't really teach anything that you don't know a little bit more than.
Yeah, you start to question everything. Like, did I explain that correctly? Is it like completely different? Did I just parrot something that's completely wrong? And you start double thinking yourself at every step. So it really does force you.
If you're gonna teach, about, I don't know, variables or strings or something, you need to know that much plus a little more, because people are going to ask questions about, hey, what if you use it like this or whatever. And so I feel like that forced me to grow up and learn maybe faster than I would have on my own if I was just doing, just writing apps on my own on the side. So I feel like that was a really cool experience. And I ended up working there for about 2 years. In kind of various capacities, from, being a mentor to like kind of going up and leading the mentors and everything. And it was ultimately, that wasn't the thing that really mattered, the leading part. It was just, I was teaching every day. And that one was fun because I really enjoyed teaching, but two, again, I also was able to really not continue to learn much per se, but it was getting a more solid foundation of everything that was taught. It was like I was going through the course again, but I was also learning new ways to use all of these concepts and, getting experience from answering questions about how would you use whatever in whatever situation. I'm like, oh shoot, I haven't even thought about that. Let's figure it out, or whatever it was. It was a great way for me to kind of solidify that foundational knowledge that, isn't particularly deep or hard by most people's standards, but it was something for me to, yeah, to just get a better foundation on and feel more comfortable with these concepts, I suppose, if that makes sense.
And not to mention, you were very close to the students' experience as well. Like just not too long ago, being a student yourself, so it allows you to kind of see things from their point of view. And one thing that I had a lot of difficulty when I started teaching, like you're more of a senior teacher than I am, just because you've been doing it longer. And when I first started, like it was hard for me to find at what level to explain something, because I know it at 5 different levels, but the students don't necessarily know any of those foundations, so none of what I said could make any sense. Whereas when you do have a relatively recent like memory of learning it yourself, you know exactly where the student is, and you can really guide them the most effective way, or you can at least divert them while you build up enough time to kind of get that foundation that you really need yourself, so that way you can explain it. Because just because you have tons of experience doesn't mean like how something actually works, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I don't honestly consider myself a good teacher, but I do feel like that was one thing that I was able to kind of bring to the table, was like that perspective of being a student. I know how it feels. Like I know what they're going through, not just on like a knowledge level, but like emotionally. If you're doing this every day, whether it's at Dev Mountain, whether it's at Lambda School where I taught after I left Dev Mountain, I was in that experience. I know exactly what it feels like emotionally, as well as, on a level of, can I even grok everything that's being thrown at me? So I felt like that was kind of an advantage for sure, that maybe I didn't really fully understand or even think about until a little bit after the fact, when it came into play, where like you guys, Dimitri, Fernando, Ben, everyone like that, at Lambda School, you guys obviously have way more experience than I do. And not to say that you're bad teachers at all by any means, but yeah, it's definitely, I felt like I could get a little bit more of an easier perspective, view their perspective, if that makes sense. I'm not really sure if I'm explaining that well.
No, definitely. And it's interesting, you kind of took a boot camp to learn about development, and you ended up more a teacher than a developer. And as like an analogy, I also went to college, and I feel like I kind of bailed on my initial plans there. I was going to go into computational physics, with all the grandioseness that entails. And I was immediately nearly failing all my physics classes. I pivoted to math, didn't do so well in that, and then realized like linguistics was a thing, and that was super easy compared to the physics and the math, and it allowed me to finish my degree like in no time at all. So I just took that, but that's essentially bailing on what I initially went there for, and I ended up finding something that I didn't even know was a thing and became super passionate about, to an extent. So like for you went into a boot camp to learn about development, and you ended up being a teacher. Is that something that you thought you would ever end up being, or did it just kind of fall in your lap in a way?
Yeah, I think I think in a lot of ways it did just kind of fall into my lap, where I don't know. I was like 21 when it happened. I didn't really have much of a plan. In general, I'm not much of a planner, but
I mean, who does at that age? To be
yeah,
clear.
and yeah, and even still, it's like I don't know what I'm really doing here. But anyway, that's besides the point. I think that I was doing it because it was paying money, and it was like paying good money, because I never really made that much money as an adult. It wasn't that much, to be clear, as like a mentor in that first job, but I was able to move out and get an apartment and have this experience that I had never really had before.
Mm-hmm.
And there were multiple times where throughout that job, whoever my boss was at Dev Mountain, they were kind of like, yeah, you should probably start looking for another job because we want you to get a real developer job and kind of experience that developer life instead of just kind of hanging around here. And I
You're
was
like,
like,
nah, I'm good. This is
yeah, I
perfectly
get
fine.
that. And I kind of brush it off. And then, that would happen another few months down the line. So that wasn't clearly it was, I guess, my intention to stay as a teacher because I enjoyed it. But it wasn't
And you
necessarily
built
that
up
of my
experience
bosses.
doing it, right? Like the more you taught,
Yeah.
the
And I
better
felt,
and better you got at it.
yeah, I felt like really the only downside of it was, I was staying in those fundamentals, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but I also wasn't learning anything outside of those fundamentals. So, yeah, I guess that wasn't really my plan. I didn't really have a plan to begin with, but I also don't think that it. I would try to do it the same way if I could, because I think one part of me wanting to stick to teaching for as long as I did was that it was for me supremely fulfilling to even be a very small part of someone's growth as a developer in getting a career in hopefully finding a passion, right? Like I did. I didn't think it would be a passion. Now looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, I've always kind of liked this kind of stuff. I don't know why I didn't try this earlier. But it's something that I absolutely love, and it's not just a job. It's a passion for me. I do stuff on the side and everything, if only just for fun. But being a part of that for someone else and seeing like the light bulb moments and seeing them be like, oh, I understand what whatever is so cool because I just remember I was right there not even that long ago at all. So yeah, I'd say, well, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
So, what pushed you to keep learning about more advanced topics since you were kind of at this comfortable zone and you're getting better and better at teaching those fundamentals, which, to be clear, like being able to teach something and being an expert in something are two very different things. You don't need to be an expert in something to teach something really well.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially if you get good at that. And being one does not necessarily mean you're going to be excellent at the other. So I do want everyone to understand that because it's very easy to say like those who can't do teach, like that's the big thing that everyone loves to kind of parrot, unfortunately about teachers, but teachers do a lot of work to make it seem seamless to be able to teach properly, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. And you don't ever realize that until you teach on your own, and then you realize how hard it is.
Yeah.
So I guess going back to my question, what is it that pushed you to kind of go beyond what you knew and start adding on those lower level concepts, I guess, that you initially glossed over?
I think part of it was just that I wasn't getting bored per se, but I think I came to that realization of there is so much out there in this wide, vast expanse that is programming and iOS development that I haven't even, I've really just scratched the surface. And so there were days in the boot camp, whether I was teaching or whether I was in it, it was like, hey, this is like a very cursory introduction into X framework, right? Or X topic. And we would have guests come in that were like, hey, I'm going to teach you about core graphics or whatever it was. And that was always super cool. But it was just this taste, right? It was just this one taste of we're going to talk about this one thing. But it left me wanting more, I suppose. And so that's when I started venturing out. And what I ended up doing, and honestly, what I still end up doing in my own personal work is I don't really... My goal when I'm writing an app is more than anything to learn something. It's not to make a ton of money. I'm not going out and being like, I'm going to sell this for $5 and I'm going to make a ton of money. Like
you're not
that's
building
not
a
my
business,
plan.
you're learning something.
Yeah. And to be honest, like the business oriented side of things has never interested me whatsoever. Like, I don't really want to build a business. That sounds like a ton of work. I'd rather just, write code and learn stuff, I guess. So whenever I'm writing something, it's always like kind of, okay, I want to learn CloudKit, or I want to learn whatever it is, Swift UI. I'm going to build an app with whatever in mind, or with that in mind, what can I build to essentially leverage that, make it essentially fun for me to learn it? Because if I'm just like following tutorials, I'm like, cool, now what? It's sort of that tutorial hell that we often hear about. So what I found to kind of help me get around that was to build something that I wanted, even if it was just for myself. Like, for example, the first Mac app that I built was super simple. It's pretty broken right now. I haven't looked at it in like years or anything, but I wanted to learn how to make a Mac app because I was like, oh, sweet. I can do iOS apps. Why not leverage this language and more or less a lot of the frameworks that are on iOS on macOS? And I wanted to learn AppKit and everything. So it was this app you give it a bunch of URLs of files in whatever directories, and it would pile them all together. So I think it was when I was like cleaning out a bunch of old external hard drives, and I had photos and videos from a bunch of SD cards and everything, and they were all in separate folders. You give them those folders, you say pull those out into a single folder, and it would kind of consolidate them into one place for you. And I thought that was super fun. It's not hard.
Yeah, it's a useful tool.
Yeah, it's like using file manager, and that's it. It's not anything crazy. The UI is terrible and everything, but it was something that motivated me to learn, hey, how does interface builder work in macOS, in Xcode for macOS, because it looks way different. How do tables work? How do NSLs work and everything? So all of that kind of stuff was it is a fun way for me to learn stuff. So I a while ago, I can't remember, I don't know if I can find it here quickly, but I just made like a list of all of my personal projects just to see how many I had, and it was something like 11 that were just sitting there unfinished. Like, I do them and I learn the thing enough to where I'm satisfied, and I generally drop them. But yeah, just
and to circle around that too, the apps that are the most useful and that tend to be the most successful in the end are always start off as tools that a developer needed for themselves. If you start off like making an app as like a business venture purely, it can be successful, but you might be short-sighted in how it is useful to others, because you are not really building something that's useful to any one customer, meaning yourself. You're trying to just like, oh, what would be nice? What would people want? And that's one way to go about it, but it's a lot easier to start the other way around, where you're trying to build something for yourself, and then it happens to get to a point where all it needs is a bit polished to give to others, and it can help them too. So if any budding developers out there, if you wanted to like break into app development, try to think about what kind of tools you need for yourself, and what kind of apps would help you in various different situations, rather than trying to think about what's that next $1 million app, and kind of starting from there, because it's difficult to kind of strike gold in one go. Whereas if you slowly, little by little, build something out, then you'll build a business around it, and you won't even put all that much effort into building that business part. You'll just be putting the effort into building something that helps you do something, and hopefully saves you time doing it, and then just polishing it up for others to be able to use.
Yeah, definitely.
So you got your first job. I assume you were fairly close to the teacher, so that way they wanted you to be part of their team in a way. Is that fair to say, or was that like your first interaction with your then teacher at that point? Is like, I never even spoke up in class, and I'm being hired.
Yeah, it was a little interesting because the way that it worked was in that interview, when there were those two people in the room, it was Andrew Madsen, who was one of the instructors. At that time, when I was a student, we had like a different instructor every day of the week. So they'd come in and give their lesson and everything. So he was one of those instructors. So, I saw him once a week. The other guy was Caleb Hicks, who was kind of the director, and who ultimately was the one that kind of interviewed me, or that offered me the interview. And so what happened was he sort of, I did the interview, he gave me the job, and he's like, okay, peace out. I'm moving on to a different part of the company. I was like, oh, okay. So then Andrew Madsen became my boss. And that's that. I mean, that alone has sort of set up my entire career, really, where I worked with him for 2 years at Dev Mountain. It was awesome. He was a great boss. I learned a ton from him. He kind of became like this mentor for me, where if I was working on a personal project, he'd take time to look at it or give me some advice and everything. And that was super cool. And he didn't have to do that. That definitely wasn't a part of his job or anything. And then Caleb had moved on to a different part of the company. Then he moved over to help kind of grow Lambda School. And so he then poached Andrew Madsen to start the iOS program there. And then a few months later, Andrew Madsen poached me to also help start the iOS program to become an instructor there. So essentially doing the same job, different title, same job, teaching every day. So I was like, sweet, let's do it. And I got paid more. So that was awesome. So yeah, and then I worked there, and for about 2 years, 2.5 years, I can't remember. Andrew Madsen left to work at LumaTouch as like an engineer and stuff. And I remember he said like, I just, right before he got kicked out of the Slack, it was like his last day or whatever, I said, hey, thanks for everything that you did. Like, I really do attribute pretty much my entire career and all of my jobs to him and Caleb. So it was, it was sad to see him go somewhere else. And, I just thanked him real quick. And then he shot back something like, well, let me know when, you're done teaching and you want to be a real developer or something like that. And, we're like, I don't think he meant anything bad by it. He was just like, hey, let me know and I'll keep you in mind for another job. Yeah, exactly. He was just being cheeky. And then at Lambda School, when they started to lay off a few employees and stuff, I was one of them. And luckily, I was able to stick around long enough that at the time of getting sort of the announcement that I was going to get laid off, I still stayed there for like 6 months or something. It was kind of a weird setup. Anyway, during that time, LumaTouch was able to be ready to hire someone. And so I was able to get an interview there again because of Andrew Madsen, and be with him again at another company. So this is round 3 with him. So yeah, what was your original question? Sorry.
Well, it just goes to show you that like it's who you know, right?
Yeah.
Like totally. In this field, if you know someone, that's your foot in the door, no matter what door. So it's so tremendously important to kind of build up the number of people that you've collaborated with, that you've spoken with, go to events, whether they are meetups that are local or big meetups like WWDC, which can be expensive. So if you can't afford it, don't. But yeah. And nowadays everything is more and more virtual. There's the iOS Happy Hour that happen once every month, and I always seem to miss them, which I kick myself for because it seems like everyone has such a good time during those. And I really like the way they do it, where they like separate out into smaller breakout rooms, which it's always like hard as an introvert at these big meetups and things like that to start talking. Like you might sit at the edge of a circle and listen into an entire conversation, but you don't really know any of them, and they didn't know any of each other either. But they kind of start talking first before you kind of walked by and got interested by what they're saying. And it's hard to kind of, again, get your foot in that door So I really liked how they set up those meeting rooms where you don't know any of these people. They're all strangers, but you get to know each other
Yeah.
very quickly. And you've instantly made new friends. So definitely take advantage of the highly remote times that we're in, to
Yes.
take advantage of that, and meet people, because when you don't know when it's going to be opportune. Like, I don't want to say it as like in a predatory way, as like you want to do this just for your potential future
No,
job. There's
totally.
more opportunities than just work, to get out of things like this, but they can be tremendously beneficial.
Yeah, it's so true. And my dad's so funny because he's like a salesman. He's also very introverted like me, but he kind of learned that you do have to do those things, like the necessary evil of networking with people, and talking with people as much as you may not want to do it at the time. He would always tell me, like, from a way early age, like, middle school age, like, it's who you know. So it's funny that you
Mm-hmm.
brought that up, because he will always talk about that as soon as any job related thing comes up. And luckily, like you said, in the time that we're in now, it's so nice that we can network on Twitter. Like, you can just start following people and being like, hey, like, I've messaged a couple people on Twitter where I used their open source library, and I was like, hey, I messaged them on Twitter and I'm like, hey, I really appreciate you doing this, or whatever. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be anything big. Just like those iOS happy hours are awesome. If you've got like a Cocoa Heads meetup near you when the world returns to normal, like, go to those. Those are great ways to network and get to know people. And like Dimitri said, it's not all about trying to get a job and be all predatory about it, but it's like getting to know cool people. Like, I think one of the coolest things that has happened from networking was all of us working at Lambda School and eventually being like, hey, we all like each other enough to build this podcast and build trying to build a community around teaching and sharing our experiences and everything. So you never really know what's going to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
the more people even just maybe by passing, they could be the ones that internally are like, hey, I've got this great person that would be awesome for this job. You never know. So I would say, as like an introvert myself, I don't necessarily go out of the way to be overly friendly and not be myself, but just, or,
And you don't have to be.
but exactly, you just be yourself. And if you're passionate about what you're doing, if you love what you're doing, you're trying to share what you love, just tweet, hey, I learned this great thing about Vapor on Twitter or whatever. You'll kind of naturally find people that like the same things as you, and they're like, oh, you know what, I love Vapor as well, or whatever it is. And you'll get to know people that way for sure. And I'm by no means the best one at that at all. I again, like I said, I don't really try too often.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not as scary maybe as it may seem when you're starting out. You have no experience, no one knows you. I mean, no one really knows me either, and that's okay. I'm not trying to become famous or anything, but just getting yourself out there and talking to people and being excited about this thing that we're doing, that we're all excited about, that is constantly evolving, is something that you can share and be excited about together, I suppose.
Hashtag make Spencer famous.
No, I'm okay. That's quite all right. I don't want to be famous.
So on the topic of not being famous, what was the first app that you published to the App Store? I'm sure it's
Oh
made you
man.
millions by now, right?
Oh, not the first app. It's the classic task app. So
Mm-hmm.
fell into that one. It was just a task app. I think its main kind of cool feature was that you could basically just have like geofenced locations or reminders going off before that was actually a part of the reminders app.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't last very long in the App Store. I took it off promptly because it was not very good. It was one that I built when I was a student, so it was very, very basic, like 2 views and a very, very shoddy constraints and everything. So it was not particularly good.
Mm-hmm. And you currently have an app on the App Store, correct?
I do currently have an app on the App Store. It's been in long. It's yes, it's been long needing an update, and I've been working on it on the side. But it's again, it was one of those passion projects where I was like, you know what, I think it was, can't remember exactly what made me want to do this. I don't think it was learning a specific framework or anything, but I was getting into it was, I had just got an iPad Pro, um,
Mm-hmm.
and the Apple Pencil and everything. So I started doing a lot of drawing and a lot of like, I tried to start doing like pixel art because I really like, like 8-bit looking old video game art type of thing. And people do crazy stuff on with it. And one thing that I noticed was they would always have this very, I don't know how to describe it, like this very pleasing like gradient of colors, but because it's 8-bit art, you can't do this like very straight gradient. It's kind of got to be in steps, and so it's called a color ramp as far as I know, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what my app is called. It's called ramps. So you break down like the two and or the starting and ending color down into as many parts as you want, kind of evenly, and it creates this ramp. So the app was to do that, save your color ramps and everything, and make it so that you could save them, load them, and then tap the color, each of the colors, and it would copy it to your clipboard. So you could have it in like split screen mode and throw it into your drawing app and kind of make your palette in there, and then get rid of it. And you don't have to have it open.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of the whole idea behind it. And it's I put it on the App Store for I think $1.99, and it surprisingly gets sales, which is yeah, it's surprising. That said, it doesn't get a ton. Like I said, I'm not trying to make a business out of this or anything, but it almost always every year will pay for my developer subscription of $99. So I'm happy with that. It is in desperate need of an update, and I've kind of essentially revamped the whole thing. I think the last time I really updated it was when the iPhone 10 came out to support, um, you know, uh, safe areas and everything. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not in great shape now. It is very much in need of an update, but that's what I have on the App Store currently. It's not a great showing, but yeah, I guess with either the teaching job or the now normal developer job, I haven't had enough time to work on it. I've taken a few days off a couple times to really like sit down and bang out as much as I could, but it's not quite there. So eventually I'll get an update, but at the moment it's still just kind of shambling along in its state of 2017 or so. So
Oh, I know the feeling of letting apps sit there, especially as you are either mentally grinding away or like physically typing away code that will eventually overhaul it. In my case, time won, and Apple like took the app off the store for like this hasn't been updated forever. It was actually 64-bit
yeah,
compatible, so it wasn't part of that purge. It was part of the just this has been sitting here forever purge. So always fun. Fun fact: the
yeah.
free version of the same app still available, only available in 32-bit. So
Oh, interesting. That's weird.
yeah, the App Store works in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's one thing to have like, like I said, I have like 9 or 10 or so side projects, and it's like it's all good because they're not released, but the one that's there, I feel a ton of guilt about not updating. So
there's that
as soon as it's out
responsibility.
in the world, yep, there's the responsibility.
Since you mentioned you have your jobby job taking up a bunch of your time, you have this podcast which is taking up 90% of your remaining time. If you
Terrible.
had unlimited time to just do anything, is there anything in particular that you would love to dive into, whether that's development or not development?
Yeah, I think like I said, development really has become like a hobby, and so I think I'd spend a fair amount of time working on my side projects and getting a bunch of them done. Like the app just needs to be updated so I can feel a little bit at peace with that. But I've got a couple side projects that I'd love to just finish up as well, just for the sake of having completed code. This is code completion after all.
Got to complete the code.
Got to complete the code. I'm not doing it right now. It's bad. I'm just sitting on the code completion. I don't know, the autocomplete, whatever. That was a bad joke. Aside from that, I kind of really like computer hardware and just kind of messing with that kind of stuff. So the guys on the podcast know I bought a shell of a Macintosh Plus that was completely stripped. It was just the front and the back of it. And I'm planning on putting a computer in it. And the computer's done and it's Hackintoshed already. I just need to kind of build a frame for it. So doing stuff like that is fun. Now that I have a house and stuff, trying to even just hang paintings and stuff would be nice, and just kind of make my house more of a house and stuff. So but a lot of, I think, what I do would be just working on my own side projects, code projects, and yeah, just feeling like I'm finishing something, because I just start a bunch of projects and never finish them. So
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you initially went to school for arts and creative endeavors, and that you got an iPad to draw on it. Have you continued doing art since then?
Not really. I think it has been nice. I really was leaning a little bit more towards like the cinematography. Like I learned Final Cut Pro in high school, and that was awesome. I loved shooting, but I loved editing. So it's nice, like for real, like I took on editing the podcast because I actually enjoy doing that. Like it's between that and just development in general, it's a lot more creative than I thought it would be when I started out. And so that, I think, has kind of filled that need to be creative, because even though it's different, I'm not necessarily creating this digital art. It kind of is digital art in a way. It's very much different than that sort of, I suppose, the traditional definition of it. But you can implement designs, well, if you've got a designer, but even in your own apps, you have to think about, how do you design the app? How do you make a good user experience? So to me, it's still very much fulfilling that craving of creating art in a way. So I feel like, I
guess in a different way,
way.
you are creating art, right?
Yeah.
Not in a
exactly.
pencil and paper type of way, but still being
Yeah.
creative.
Exactly. And I never felt like that was what I wanted to do. It was always something digital, Photoshop, graphic design, cinematography, whatever it was on kind of that side of things was more what I was looking for, just because, like I said, I have a super shaky hand, can't draw, can't paint, any of that stuff. And
I can do Command Z art.
Really hard.
The more I can Command Z and slowly perfect that stroke, then it looks perfect. No one will ever know.
That's right. Yeah. I'd much rather draw with Core Graphics and Bezier paths on, on that kind of stuff than.
It's like, does this number look good? Command R. No. Okay. Does this number look good? Command R.
It's a lot more forgiving.
Yeah. It's like the olden days when you needed to wait for the render, you need to wait for the build, and then you see what comes out, right? Yeah. Renders instantly, but you still need to wait.
Yeah. I don't know. Have you ever watched like any Corridor Digital videos, or do you know who they are?
Yeah, that's the YouTube channel that makes a very surprising visual effects. Kind of like, sometimes they do like little commercials, sometimes they do little montages, right? Yeah,
they do a bunch of stuff. They've got a ton of stuff kind of going on, but one of the things they do is like they'll do like a visual artist react thing. And so they'll pull up movies or whatever, Justice League, whatever, but they pulled up Tron, the original Tron, and walked through the breakdown of how they did that. It was just absolutely insane what like VFX artists had to do back in like the 80s, the 90s, just to get these very basic shapes on the screen. And literally, like you said, having to sit there and wait for it to render for hours, if not days, for these very basic shapes that now we're like in Swift UI. And I think of Lynn's app that's got all of the food in the walk, and it's moving as it's scrolling, and it's like, it's crazy, all of the things that
Xcode hates that app.
That's I believe it. But
It's just one asset catalog that has all this artwork in it. So anytime she makes one little change, it's just a single threaded. Xcode needs to recompile the entire asset catalog. It takes like a good 2 or 3 minutes. Xcode is not happy with that.
Yeah, I was talking to Andrew today about that because we're both using SwiftUI right now at work, and he was saying that he was kind of looking into like how to make it compile faster, because it's both just destroying our work computers right now.
And I guess M1 basically S's and M2s and M3s probably, right?
Come on, Apple. That's the only reason. just for SwiftUI, it's the only thing that can handle it.
There'll be a SwiftUI coprocessor on it, right?
That would be amazing. But he was saying like it basically recompiles the entire app every time you make a change, and that's why it's so slow. So yeah, it'll be nice someday.
So most developers don't know this, but Xcode, before it switched to LLDB, used to have a feature called Fix. It was a little Scotch tape icon in the toolbar. And basically, you could go ahead and change code, click the Fix button, it'll recompile that section and inject it into the running app that you had like currently going. This blew up like many times, depending on like how much you changed. But if you're just tweaking like 1 or 2 little numbers, it actually was quite handy, because then you can, like you said before, when you're drawing with core graphics, you can very quickly see as your view redraws like the new model of that. And SwiftUI kind of does that if it can. So if you're just changing like a number, that recompiles instantly basically, and you can see that preview. But the moment you mess with the view hierarchy in any significant way, then it has to recompile everything, and that's your entire app.
Yep.
Hopefully some of that is cached. Not all of it is. But that like drastically slows down those previews once your app gets to a significant size. So it's almost easier to build your previews in isolation in a temporary Xcode project, just to kind of see it and get it going. And then once you're happy with that, you'll never use the preview again for that view. And that's fine. But it does test your ability to kind of isolate your code, right? Because if you're able to write a view that you can just copy paste out of the project it's in into another, that means that it's very reusable, and it's not tightly coupled to what you're doing, or at least not tightly coupled in such a way where you can't just throw up a few dummy structs to get stuff going. So if you can program in that way, it will speed you up. But again, that's like working around the tool, which never feels right.
Yeah. Even then, and that's actually what I did to begin with, was putting it in a separate project, and I was still chugging, and I was like, dude, this is a 2020 MacBook Pro. Like, come on. Or 2019, whatever the latest Intel one was. And, it's like, this needs to be better. Even when you turn off the canvas, and so it's, in theory, not rendering anything, it still was a lot, like, even just editing the text was a lot slower, and I don't know. I'm very excited to see what WWDC has, and hopefully there's, version 3 of SwiftUI or whatever they're going to call it. So that would be my hope for WWDC, I think, the most.
So other than SwiftUI 3.0, any other like wish list items that you'd like to see this year?
Just more iterations on the M1, whatever the next M series chip is, whether it's M1X, M2, M1S, whatever, I think would be awesome. Not that I need one. I'm honestly so happy with my MacBook Air. It's not even funny how I was so worried about it when, no one had reviewed it or anything, and I bought it. I was like, am I going to regret this? It's a MacBook Air. I've seen what MacBook Airs do on Intel, and they're just so slow. But it's blown me away how crazy it is. So the M1 is awesome, and it just gives me so much hope for the future of development in general, being able to just make crazy awesome apps with really much lower limits or much higher limits than even what we have nowadays. I mean, nowadays we have, I'm never concerned about memory management or anything like that. Like I'm sure you had to way back in the day. But, just being able to push things forward is just super exciting. So
little incremental progress.
Yep. Except when you go to Apple Silicon, then it's like, oh, hey, we're just going to blow away everyone at 15 watts.
Yeah.
Which is
it
so
happens.
Cool. It does.
It gets us. It gets everyone who's interested in technology excited because it's such a dramatic step forward. Then, for the past 10 years, it feels like nothing has really been improving, and it's nice to see sudden improvement in that regard. Yeah. Now, I guess as a final question, assuming a solar flare hit the Earth, all technology instantly got fried. Doing what we do as software developers probably not going to be doable for like 10 years as we rebuild society or whatnot. What do you take up next?
Oh my goodness, that is a terribly tough question. That would be my worst nightmare. I honestly have no idea.
This is Spencer thinking of his plan B.
And I don't plan, man. I went over that. I mean, if we're being whimsical here, not being realistic, I would
totally
become a book reviewer, and I would just read all day. Just sit in my house, probably in my basement, so it's cold, and just read books and write reviews on paper and pencil, and have my hand cramp up every 5 seconds because I haven't used a pen and a pencil in years to any large extent.
What's handwriting?
I know, right? I just watched listened to the Explain It Slowly podcast, which you guys should definitely listen to, by Dimitri and his wife. Fantastic, on what stenographers are, and I learned that they can type 300 words a minute, which is twice as fast as you can talk. That's crazy.
I mean, it's all gibberish,
fast.
to be fair. Like, you look at that piece of paper, it's just random letters typed on that piece of paper, but it's fast.
But it's intelligible to them. I mean, that's crazy.
All joking aside.
So, yeah, I guess I'd have to find a typewriter that would probably be a hot commodity in that post-apocalyptic time, and write my reviews that way instead of using a pencil and paper.
I have one from the 1950s. I'll send it right over.
Yes. All right. How are you going to get it to me? By horseback?
I'm thinking turtle. That will be the new new mode of transportation. Just load it back on its back and then just wait. Hopefully it goes in the right direction.
That sounds good. It's slow, but it's reliable, I suppose.
Yeah, it gets there. The rabbit just gets distracted. Same with the horse, but the turtle, it gets there. Or is it a tortoise? I might get the two animals confused. You might or may not see that typewriter.
I guess we'll have to see. Let's not, though, because that future would be insane to me. Yeah, growing up in an age where, like, I think I am probably the last, or getting pretty close to the last generation that can remember a time without the internet, knowing what it was then and what it is now. It's like I never want to go back. I like technology, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
It's good that it moves ever forward. Not to mention, typewriters are hard to type on. Like, I have the claw typing mechanism that, like, I didn't learn how to type properly. I still can't type properly. I still need to look at the keyboard because who'd have think that that's my job, that I need to type a lot. But yeah, I have the claw mechanism, so I don't type fast. So that, like, that but being able to type fast is a good skill to have. So if you have the opportunity, if you're in high school, like listening to this, and you have the boring typing class, you probably had that earlier than high school. I don't know.
I did.
Yeah. So pay attention to that class. Don't do what I did and hold down the F key, because that seems to trick the software into thinking you're the fastest typist in the world, and the teacher doesn't know the software enough to be able to tell the difference. So don't do that. Do it properly. Learn how to type. You will thank yourself later, because we type so much nowadays, and being good at it is useful.
Yep. Even if you're not a programmer, but especially
Definitely.
if you are.
Especially if you are. So any piece of advice towards budding programmers that are learning development now, and want to get better?
I think writing code is the biggest thing. I had this idea when we kind of first started writing the pod or doing the podcast and starting code completion in general, which was to make a video on tutorial hell, because I thought like that was what I saw students go through a ton before they came to whatever boot camp it was. They eventually, went to the boot camp probably because they couldn't learn on their own, or they didn't have as much success learning on their own as they wanted to, which I don't blame them at all. It's hard. You get to a point where you are either just reading tutorials, watching videos on, tutorial videos, whatever it is, or just reading books, and it's hard to apply that. But I think the thing that has helped me grow the most was getting out of just reading tutorials and writing my own code. And that isn't to say that tutorials are bad, but I just think that getting your fingers on the keyboard are so much better long term for your learning than reading about things. It's, in a theoretical sense, it's great to read about math, but if you're never actually doing math, you're not really going to understand the principles behind it. And, you'll have, or at least what I had often was these like light bulb moments, or like these aha moments where I'd maybe read something in this tutorial and be like, okay, I'm going to try to translate that into my own app and try to figure it out. Like the delegate pattern, for example, was probably like one of the first things that was so hard to me that I just couldn't wrap my mind around. And then eventually you write it enough that it just sort of clicks and you're like, I've got it. I understand what's going on here. I understand this flow. So I guess my advice would just be write code. Just keep writing code. Use whatever resource you want, and that's great. If you need to follow a tutorial to, learn about the delegate pattern, go for it. And then maybe after that, try to write a different app or a different part of an app in a slightly different way, using the delegate pattern again, but without instructions or whatever it is. Just keep writing code. And again, for me, what helped a ton was finding something that would be motivating for me to write, not just, hey, let's make it, a task app like I did. I wasn't interested in that. It was an idea that my cousin had. But making something that would be genuinely useful to me or interesting to me. So, if I had a student that was like really into League of Legends and he wanted to make a League of Legends app, I was like, great. That's awesome. And he made this, app where you can look up statistics about players and stuff. I don't care what it is. As long as you are passionate about it, that's going to give you the extra motivation when you are sitting at your laptop or your computer and say, I'm tired. I want to go watch Netflix to keep writing code. So that was very long-winded.
That reminds me, when I was a kid, I really loved playing Zelda Ocarina of Time on Nintendo 64.
Nice.
And I loved reading the walkthroughs and the collections of all the items on like these janky websites that you could only access over dial-up. So it took forever to load and all that. But like our Mac had iDVD, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. I can make a little interactive like walkthrough app that got burned to a DVD, and then you put that in the DVD player and you can watch it. And like
That's
I was
awesome.
interested in one thing, so I like put the two things together. Now I never went anywhere in particular, but it was something interesting to kind of work on. So like Spencer said, I want to double down on that. Find something that you want to build, and build it for yourself, because that will be all the motivation you need. If you don't know how to do something, you'll automatically figure out a different way to do it, because you'll have the drive necessary to plot down what those next steps are. Like part of tutorial hell is not knowing what's the next step. Um, Whereas when you're making something, you know what the steps are. You just don't know necessarily how to do them, but since you know what the step is, you know what to look for, and you'll eventually find your way there. And that's how many developers kind of become professionals, is by doing that enough times, right? Just gotta rinse and repeat.
Yep. That's
So
what the
I
job
know.
ends up being. Oh, sorry.
No, no, definitely.
I was just gonna say
Um,
that's what the job ends up being, right? Where
mhm.
you have a ticket in Jira or whatever, and it says, "Hey, go build this thing," and you're like, "I have no idea how to do this. I'm doing that right
To
now."
Google.
Yeah. To Google, ask your friends, like whatever it is, read a tutorial. It's not going to be exactly what you want, probably, but you can adapt it and you can kind of figure it out from there.
So, as a final question, you spent more time as an instructor than a developer proper. If anyone wants to become a teacher in any capacity, do you have any advice for them?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I'd say if you want to, become a teacher or start a YouTube channel on programming or whatever, I think the best thing again is just to be practicing it. Like I said at the kind of the start, you need to know more than you're going to teach about whatever subject it is. Otherwise, it won't come out well. And I've had that happen to me many, many times. It's not like I am professing to be a great teacher by any means, but you need to be able to explain enough that it makes sense. And like Dimitri brought up, you need to know what your target audience is. If you're making a YouTube channel or you're teaching a bunch of senior level developers, cater towards that audience. If you're teaching a bunch of people that are brand new to programming, obviously you need to have a mindset of how can I make this make sense to someone that has no prior knowledge of whatever I'm talking about. So introducing concepts in a way that you can maybe make analogous to something else in their life, right? Like the delegate pattern is you placing an order at a restaurant, and it goes through this process like you would order at a restaurant or whatever it is.
You mean you didn't think about the delegates at the UN as your, like, this is why they
No,
named it the delegate pattern? It's like, why did they call it that? It's
I
no
know.
one like has any personal experience with what a
Like,
delegate
oh
is.
yes,
It's
I'm
like this
very familiar with the UN.
concept. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
that's like the
yeah,
only idea of a delegate that I have outside of programming is like, oh, there are these people at the UN that represent countries, I guess.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think if you want to be a teacher, yeah, my two pieces of advice: know more than you are trying to teach, and figure out who your audience is. Just like if you're building an app, you need to figure out who your target user is, right? And so you can sort of
Hmm.
cater towards that. It's the same concept, I suppose. So,
Yeah, and don't let that hold you back. Like if you don't know, if you're not a complete 100% professional in something, don't let that hold you back from trying.
yeah.
It's
Oh,
by
yeah.
trying that you're going to realize what you don't know, and then you can double down on that and release a 2.0. Like the analogies continue between
Yep.
these different fields.
That's true. There were many, many times where, especially when I like very first started teaching, where I'd start explaining something and I'd have to say, let me back up here and kind of try that again. That's
Hmm.
totally cool. You're not gonna. No one is going to teach perfectly every single time. It's very much a process, and that's okay. You
And it's
like
best.
Dimitri said, go for it.
Oh, and it's best to be upfront about that, right? You don't want the student to be confused by you like saying it in three different ways. But if you say, "Let me retry that," then they're gonna be mentally prepared to take it from a different point of view. Whereas they might try to glue those two points of view together, and they're just incompatible because we as a teacher flubbed.
Yep, exactly.
And this is also a perfect chance for us to plug our friend and co-host Fernando, who has started releasing a series called Experience Kit. I believe that's right. We didn't prepare this at all ahead of time, so I might get that wrong. But it's a series of videos that start from different levels of knowledge. So it's starting from the very beginning, assuming you know nothing about networking. I believe is the first the first topic of the series, and every episode that he releases kind of goes up a level or down a level. I don't know, this high level and low level analogy has always confused me, but high level is something that's easy, low level is something that's hard.
Right.
That's how you can think of it. So he goes down a level each time and explains in more detail about what's actually going on. So what you brought up, Spencer, about knowing your audience, this kind of ties into that a little by kind of separating it out. And I think Wired does a very similar thing.
They do
with a
They're
variety
so
of topics.
good. Oh my gosh!
And the professional will explain to a kindergartner what it is that they do, but then they'll slowly go up in education level all the way up to someone that is at their exact same level, and the conversation is completely different. And it's fascinating whether you know about that topic or not. If you know about the topic, you can probably follow it along, but then as soon as you don't know about that topic, once it reaches those higher levels, whether a PhD student or another professor in the field, you're lost because you have no idea what they're talking about at that point. It's a completely different language.
It's so cool though, because like the fundamental, the underlying concept is the exact same, but the level of detail and how they explain it is different. Those videos are so cool. We should put those in the show notes.
Definitely, we'll be sure to look those up. So, anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, I appreciate you doing this one-on-one. It was cool to kind of talk about how I started. I think it's a little bit of an unconventional way of getting into programming, but I think that is an unconventional way of getting into programming seems to actually be the norm. Whether in one way or another, it seems to be unconventional. So appreciate you guys listening.
I'm glad to have you as always. So I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Code Completion to know when new episodes get released. If you want to ask Spencer questions, he is at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SpencerCurtis on Twitter. So be sure to make him famous. # make Spencer famous.
Please don't.
And if you want to follow me, my name is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buñol. That's DimitriBouniol on Twitter. And we'll both see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.
Do you need to take care of your thumb? I noticed it's bleeding.
Yeah, I think it's done now. I'm good.
Okay. You got
have
some
a
on your
bad
nose
habit
at one point. And then...
I know. I have a bad habit of just like playing with whatever's on my desk, and I have this knife that I kind of stab myself with.
The dangers of being a developer at home.
I know.
And the safety of a chair, right?